Okay, so if we have a look at the plan of the structure, the length of the complex is 2/3 of a mile long. The width is 1/3 of a mile wide. The complex itself and the project went under 5 different stages of evolution. The idea was to build a simple mastaba tomb with a vertical shaft. Now the term Mastaba is an Arabic term and it means Pharaoh's bench. The Egyptians called their burial places houses or mansions of eternity. They didn't use the term Mastaba. So anyway, the architect or overseer appointed for this task was a chap called Imhotep, and he must have been related to the king of Egypt in some way. We know that he was a priest of Heliopolis, and Heliopolis was the cult of Ra. So that gives us some basic information. So what we know is that it was going to be a simple tomb. Then the second stage of development was to add some limestone on the outside of the tomb. Then the third stage was to build another 3 layers on top of the mastaba. The fourth stage was to put another 2 on top, and the final stage was to take up to a 6-step, what we call pyramid. Well, it would have been I personally prefer to describe it as a 6-step mastaba tomb or mansion of eternity. Then the outer complex walls were defined in the 5th stage of development with the different focuses on buildings and rituals, etc. So what we see with the final complex is Djose's desire to build Egypt in stone. This new material, up to this point they've only used mud bricks for a king's tomb with stone lintels around the doorway. So stone has a meaning in Egypt now. It represents eternity. So stone represents eternity, the fact that it's going to be there forever. Now the inner core of the structure is local sandstone from Saqqara. Another reason why they chose this plateau to build so many tombs is because it had lots of outcrop of rock on a local level. The outer casing stones, which you see on the outside and the inside of the courts, that is the fine white Tura Limestone, which if it's left standing in the hot sun for a long time will go a nice golden yellow colour. Again, that colours are important in ancient Egypt. Remember, the colour black represents new life because the annual flood brought that new rich soil which they could grow their food on. And remember, the Egyptians believed that their gods were had flesh which was covered in gold. So to have this golden finish once the sun had bleached that Tura limestone was a must, or a real desire for any king of Egypt. Remember, the king is the living Horus. So the people are building for their god, the representative between heaven and earth. He is the go-between, their embassy on their behalf between the people and the gods. While they're there working, they will be fed every day, they will be transported every day. We don't know too much about the 3rd dynasty, but we do know that in the Middle Kingdom, doctors were on hand to give first aid and repair breaks, broken bones, because obviously working with stone can be dangerous. And this is the first time that these people have undertaken this new material. So if you look at the structures as we go along, you'll see that the stones are quite small, easy to handle. They haven't got a lot of confidence in cutting and splitting big rocks of big blocks of stone yet. So this is the first start of the project and the first start of our tour. So as you can see from the map, the outer walls all have lots of dummy entrances, but right in this corner here is the colonnade entrance. So if we have a look at the design of the colonnade entrance, you'll see it's what's called it looks very similar to like a false door, but it's not a false door. And I'll explain the false door in more detail once we get to the Mortuary Temple. But if you look at the way they've built this doorway, originally they built a flat wall. They didn't build that design that you see there. That was all carved out of that flat wall. If you have a look at the corners, they built the corner, and then to get that nice sharp line, they cut that corner. So that was the labour force that was available to the ancient Egyptians. So 90% are the hauler, the carriers, the movers, the shakers, the gangs that are dragging the stones from the local quarry, from Tura, loading stones on and off of barges and ships, because Tura is on the other side of the Nile. Although it's only 8 kilometers away, it's still quite a way to get stone to this project. The other 10% are the stonemasons, the people who finish off the stone, who carve out the reliefs, who carve out those designs. So they're going to be representing 10% of the workforce. And then you've got the overseers, the administrators, the stewards, the mayors. If you think about all the things that have to be in place, fresh water has got to be brought to this site every day for the workforce. Food has got to be prepared. So bread has got to be baked. Beer's got to be brewed. Fish has got to be dried. Animals have got to be killed for meat ration. What was it like for the workers? Well, let's say you're a farmer or a herdsman. If you're a herdsman in Lower Egypt, then 9 times out of 10, you're working for either a vizier or an overseer or one of the king's cousins, a mayor or a steward. You're never ever going to taste beef in your life. Your meat sources are going to come from ducks and geese, if you're lucky. Okay, so access to having cattle was a no-no for the majority of ancient Egyptians. But if you came to the king's project like this, you might get a beef meat ration maybe once a month while you were there. And remember, you're working for the king for 5 years. Okay then, so let's go through this colonnade doorway. Look up, and up there you're going to see this design. This design is date palm tree trunks going across, replicated in stone. So again, the desire that the king and his architect Imhotep had was to recreate Egypt in stone. So you had date palm trees in the natural environment, they are replicated in stone. So we carry on through this doorway and we come to the colonnade hallway. Okay, now what's interesting here is on the right hand side there are 22 niches, and on the left hand side there are 22 niches. And it's been suggested by previous archaeologists who worked on these projects that there were originally 22 statues of the king with the major deities of Lower Egypt on one side, and 22 statues of the king with the other deities of Upper Egypt, representing Mart. Remember Mart, that balance between Upper and Lower Egypt? Everything is about the dual kingdoms to make it one state. Okay. The other interesting thing is look at the columns here. These are called pilaster columns. They are engaged columns. They're not freestanding columns. And again, it shows us the confidence that the Egyptians had with this new material. They weren't quite sure if they could produce freestanding columns at this time in their civilization. The first time they used this material, and they didn't want any accidents or mistakes or failures. So they've used these small stones, and they engaged them with the wall. So they are engaged pilaster columns. Right, so we're going to turn around, we're going to walk back out of the colonnade hall, and we're going to carry on down to that Hebsed court. So if you have a look at the map, we come round the corner, we come out of the colonnade hall, we're going into the Hebsed court. Now, when the king of Egypt came to the throne, he had to go through a coronation called the Sed Festival. And the Sed Festival happened at the White Walled City, which later on was called Memphis. In Memphis, there were 3 pavilions, one for the north, one for the south, and one for union. The king would have to go through ceremonies of north and south, erect a Djed pillar, which represented the backbone of Osiris in the coronation pavilion of union before he could become king. And he had to do that every 22 years of his reign to rejuvenate his spirit so he was fit enough to rule Egypt. So what King Djose has here, which probably was suggested by his architect Imhotep, is a rejuvenation Hebsed court representing the north. Okay, so if you have a look here at this north pavilion here, this design is the hieroglyph for northern Egypt. And if you have a look at the southern one, okay, that design there is the hieroglyph for Upper Egypt. And you've got those lotus flowers in those fluted columns. So remember, to get that design, they built the wall flat, and then they carved that design out of the flat wall. Wow. But remember, they're building for a living God, the living Horus. Now, if you have a look around the court here, you can see that the inside of the court originally had columns incorporated in the design. So what they did was they built a sort of a wall which came out and went in again, and then they fashioned those columns, okay, to look like papyrus reeds. Okay, so that's the flutes on the papyrus reeds. And in those columns, around that court, there are statues of the king's family. Okay, so again, those statues are engaged statues. They're not freestanding statues. Okay, again, it's this use of this new material stone, which they're not used to. So we're going to carry on down. So we've got the Hebsed court. Now we've got the house for the north and the house for the south. Look at the papyrus reeds on the outside. This is the basic architectural design copied all over the ancient world. The Egyptians used this architecture to replicate in other buildings throughout their 3,000-year history. But when the Western powers, when the Greeks came to Egypt, they copied from the Egyptians. When the Romans conquered the Greeks and came to Egypt, they copied from the Egyptians. And when we became imperial powers in the West, we copied from the Greeks and the Romans. So the architecture that you see here is in our civilization. Okay, so it all comes from Egypt. Now we're going to walk down to this corner here, and you can see these people here standing in front of this hole in the wall. This is a serdab, and there were 4 serdabs around the pyramid structure. And inside the serdab, let's have a look, you can see a statue of the king. King Djose. So the Egyptians didn't worship idols. That's what the Hebrews tell us. They worship idols. They believed in shamanism. They believed that there were spirits all around, everywhere, that there was a spirit, a car inside you. And when your body died, your car left the body and it was free to travel. The serdab here is the statue inside is like a telephone box. The king's spirit can go inside that statue and converse with the living. So these places were places where people could have conversation with the dead king's spirit. Okay? And I'll tell you why later on. Now we're going to go round the corner and we're going to have a look at the Mortuary Temple. Because when the king is buried here, it's not just going to be a burial and let's go home, guys. There is a mortuary cult installed at this place to provide for the king's spirit. So right the way down there was a big false door. We don't know what it was like because it's gone, it's been quarried away. There was a big false door. So a false door is a lintel design, and the door is solid stone. And what the Egyptians believed was that if you had the right magical writing around that false door, the king's spirit could leave his tomb in his spirit form, travel through the solid structure, come out of the false door and into the Mortuary Temple. Now if you have a look at the Mortuary Temple, it's been quarried away. And those stones have been reused all over modern day Egypt. So we can only imagine how magnificent the Mortuary Temple was. And of course, the mortuary cult would provide offerings to feed the king's spirit, to rejuvenate the king when he returned to Egypt. So to give you a quick catch up on ancient Egyptian religion at this time, the Egyptians believed that when they died, their spirit would go into the underworld and you would dwell in the underworld. And the underworld is under the earth, okay, somewhere, we don't know where. We've got pictures of it later in the New Kingdom times. And down there it was pretty tough. You had to get up every day and work long hours and all that sort of thing. So what you took with you, or you had in your burial to make sure that you could have a pleasant time in the underworld, was a Ushabti figure. And Ushabtis were magical figures which had hieroglyphs on, and if you spoke the Ushabti's name, then they would come alive and they would do your work and service for you. So hopefully, if you was a normal ancient Egyptian, you might have 5 or 6 or maybe 10 or 12 of these Ushabtis in your burial, so that when you was in the underworld, they would come alive and they would work for you. In the king's case, when night time comes and the afterlife is available, which is where the gods are, the stars, the king would journey from his tomb to the afterlife to speak to the gods on behalf of the people. That's what the ancient Egyptians believed. And that journey was long and perilous to get to the afterlife and back. So when daytime came and the afterlife was gone, it closed, the Egyptian spirit had to be rejuvenated with food and water and beer and dates and that sort of thing. And that's what the mortuary cult was there to do. So why did the mortuary cult stay at the site? Well, we know from later times that kings provided lands and animals and resources for the mortuary cults to use to provide those offerings. So they were given free, tax-free lands, animals and that sort of thing. So a certain percentage of the cult worked at the temple, performing those rituals, and the other part of the percentage of the cult would work on the lands that the king had given them, growing wheat and barley, tending animals and that sort of thing. So we don't know what the rotation was between the cult, but we do know that they had tax-free lands. No other king could tax those lands while the cult was performing their duty for the dead king. So the king is buried, but there is lots of activity at this site. And we've got a mortuary cult there doing their religious duties to feed the king's spirit every day. Let's get back to the serdabs. There are pilgrims coming to this site, bringing offerings and asking favours of the dead king's spirit. And that's why there's a serdab at each corner of the step pyramid, because there would have been queues of pilgrims at each corner with their offering to speak to the king's dead spirit at each serdab. So this is a form of income for the mortuary cult. They're doing business. This is business at this mortuary complex. Okay then, so we're going to retrace our steps now. We're going to leave the Mortuary Temple. We're going back to the House of the North and South. We're going back to the Hebsed Court. We're going into the colonnade hallway, and we're coming out the other end. Now we're in the open court, and you can see the pyramid straight in front of us. But this is what we want to see, what originally the inside of the court was like. And right here, you can see this wall here, this flat wall, and all of that design has been carved out of that flat wall. And at the top are those cobras. That cobra is the ancient goddess Wadjet, and she is the ancient deity of Lower Egypt. Later on, you see her on the king's crown. She's up there, and she's there to protect the king, to spit venom into the eyes of the king's enemies. So that's the ancient goddess Wadjet. And this design went right the way round the open court down to the pyramid and on the other side as well. Wow, the work involved in producing that. Now, if we look at the pyramid again, you can see the inner core stone. All the Tura limestone has been quarried away. Now, when the Arabs invaded Egypt, they stripped off the Tura limestone because they're nomadic people. They didn't have the skill set to go and quarry stone, so they got the stone removed from Egyptian pyramids to build their palaces and fortresses in modern day Cairo. So that's where the Tura limestone went. But you can just imagine how magnificent the structure was when it was covered with fine white Tura limestone and the sun had yellowed it, and it would just look like a golden jewel in a white desert sand. Amazing. Now then, we're going to walk down there, and you can see this funny B structure on the floor of the open court. This is the beginning and the end of the Hebsed festival, the spiritual rejuvenation of the king's spirit, the start and the finish of the course. Because, excuse me, at the coronation of the king, he had to run a distance, a circuit, to prove that he was fit and able to rule Egypt. So he started at the start position, ran the course, and came back to the finish. When he came back to the finish in the 3rd dynasty, they would give him a bow and 4 arrows, and he'd shoot a bow to the north, 1 to the south, 1 to the east and the west. At that time, that was the domain of the king: north, south, east and west. Remember that, because it does change in the 4th dynasty. Okay, we'll walk a bit further on, and you can see the altar. This is the sacrificial altar where they would have killed the animals. Wow. This is not an altar for ducks or geese. No, it's not. It's an altar for cattle. So they slaughtered at least one cattle. We don't know if it was daily, weekly, monthly, on this altar. And then a portion of that sacrifice would be taken round the other side of the Mortuary Temple, okay, to be offered to the dead king's spirit, to rejuvenate him for his journey from his tomb between night time to the afterlife and back from the afterlife to his tomb. So his spirit needed to be rejuvenated, fed just like a living person. So that's the altar. Now we're going to turn round and we're going to head back to those cobras that we saw earlier, that frieze of cobras, because just outside the colonnade hall you'll find a modern staircase that will take you up there and you can have a closer look. There you go. It's up there. Wow. You can see in fine detail that closer look at those cobras, all been cut out of a flat surface. Now look down towards the pyramid. On the left hand side, built into the pyramid, is our sets of galleries, and those galleries are for the king's, known as the King's Suite, where his spirit could rest and enjoy the finer things of life, his apartments for a dead king's spirit. And in there are some beautiful blue finance tiles which decorate it. So blue, the colour blue, represented spirituality for the ancient Egyptians. Now unfortunately those galleries are closed now because they're worried that the pyramid is quite unstable. But on site at North Saqqara there is the North Saqqara Museum, and you can see those blue, you can see samples of those blue tiles, sorry, in that museum. Now we're going to turn around and we're going to walk over there, because over there is the entrance to the southern tomb. Now when the first kings of Egypt built tombs at Abydos, they also built a second tomb in North Saqqara. So Abydos was dedicated to Wawepit and Osiris, the gods of the dead, the openers of the way, and Saqqara was the god of the dead for Lower Egypt. So they had two tombs, their main tomb, which was normally at Abydos, and a dummy tomb which was in North Saqqara. The southern tomb is the king's dummy tomb. So if anyone breaks into his tomb under the step pyramid, he can survive, he can dwell in the southern tomb. So the southern tomb is the insurance policy against tomb raiders, Lara Croft and that bunch. You can see that the southern tomb has suffered extensive damage. Years ago, back in the 1980s, you could go down into the southern tomb, and as you walk through that doorway there was a tail of a snake, and it was all in blue tiles, and as you followed the steps down into the main part of the tomb you came across the snake's head, and that snake represented eternity. But unfortunately there have been at least 2 earthquakes in Egypt, and the southern tomb is too dangerous for you to go into now. But to see a sample of those blue tiles, please go to the North Saqqara Museum, because down there you'll find another discovery. The person who reconstructed the step pyramid itself, and I'll tell you about that very